right, well, now Hitler's chancellor, but in the German system of government, you still have a position of authority higher than that of chancellor. That's the president. And Hitler wanted to be president. The question then was he going to be able to make himself president? Was he going to hold elections to be president? Well, this is what happened. Imagine you woke up tomorrow morning and the United States Capitol building was on fire. And the Washington, D.C. police announced that they had captured the person responsible for the fire. And it turned out to be, let's say, a Islamic terrorist from Syria. Well, what kind of reaction would the American people have to that? What kind of reaction would you have to that? Because that's exactly what happened in Germany. They woke up one day in their Congress building, like our beautiful white Capitol, their Congress building, that I've been to many, many times. Just so you know, I've spent 6 years of my life in Germany. I graduated high school over in Germany. For those people that want to deny the Holocaust, and I run into them quite frequently, actually too frequently, I can promise you that it occurred. I've been there. I've seen these locations. I've been to Auschwitz once. I've been to Dachau 3 or 4 times, 3 times. Sachsenhausen, Bergen-Belsen. I've been to 4 of the major camps. Okay, so what Hitler was able to do was to get the German Congress to pass a law called the Enabling Law, which essentially gave him unlimited power. And he knew exactly how to use it. Now, Hitler's a strange bird. And to understand the Holocaust, you've got to understand Hitler. You've got to understand the ideology that he created, the National Socialist German Workers' Party ideology, the Nazi Party ideology. You cannot separate the Nazi Party ideology and Hitler. You can't. Because the ideology itself comes from the mind of Adolf Hitler. It's one of the things that actually makes it philosophically almost untenable, because it's incoherent. If you try and look at, say, what is the platform that the Nazi Party stood for, you would find inconsistency after inconsistency after inconsistency. And the reason is because what the Nazi Party ideology is quite simply what Hitler in his mind creates and then says this is what it is. So the Nazi Party and the ideology that they follow it's directly connected to this figure, Adolf Hitler. And there's actually a great quote from Carl Jung, the great successor psychoanalyst of Sigmund Freud. And now this guy, Wagner, lived through the Second World War. He was a contemporary of Hitler's in many ways. And they asked him about Hitler. And here's a guy whose specialty now is psychoanalysis. And this is what he said of Hitler. He said, "His voice is nothing other than his own unconscious, into which the German people have projected their own selves. That is, the unconscious of 78 million Germans. That is what makes him powerful." And then he goes on to say, without the German people, Hitler would be nothing. And I think Jung's right there, partly. I also think he's wrong, partly. What do I mean by that? Okay. The German people were full of resentment after the First World War. If you allow resentment to fester long enough inside of you, you'll become a bitter person. And if you're a bitter person, it doesn't take much for someone to come along and make you an angry person. And if you're angry, it's easy to get you to be violent. The one thing I know about studying the Holocaust, I used to always think of myself as the victim in this, that I could only think of myself as one of the people having this criminal act perpetrated against them. I could never imagine myself as one of the camp guards walking around. But the truth is actually quite scarier. And it's possible that any of us could have been that camp guard. And if you're given that power and authority over someone, how would you abuse it? Now, he's a strange bird. So to understand the ideology, let's talk for a minute about Hitler. Hitler's born into a family, sort of lower middle class. Daddy is essentially like a customs and border patrol agent. Hitler's born in the little town of Braunau, which it's actually right across the river from Germany. It's in what was at the time the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Hitler's father was a customs agent, and he sat in a little booth there at a bridge, and as people came into Germany to sell products, his job was to collect a tax. Now, Hitler's father was a guy that actually had some serious alcohol issues. In fact, he ends up dying in a bar in a corner stool area, has a massive heart attack. So he dies drinking. Daddy was not a nice guy. Daddy liked to come home and take out all of his anger on Hitler's mother. And if you look at the pictures of Hitler as a young man, especially as a child, say 8 or 10, and compare them to pictures of his father and his mother, what you'll see is this. He looks nothing at all like his father, nothing. But he's almost identical to his mother. The resemblance is striking. And so Hitler as a young man, he's now faced with having Daddy come home in a drunken rage and taking it out on Mom. But as he gets older, what does he want to do? He wants to step in the middle, take those blows so that Mom doesn't get it. He's very protective of his mom. In fact, you could argue that Hitler was very much a mama's boy. He was raised as a good Catholic. He was both an acolyte and a crucifer. He carried the cross and the processional. He lit the candles and extinguished them at the end of the religious ceremonies. He was raised as a good Catholic, although his perception of God and right and wrong are skewed by influences in his life. Influences like Friedrich Nietzsche, who very famously said, God is dead. Well, think about that. If God is dead, then what provides us a moral framework that will allow us all to cooperate and cohabitate peacefully? Well, Nietzsche said what would happen is this, that the world would descend first into nihilism. Nihilism. What is that? Anyone know? Nihilism. Nihilism works like this. You ask yourself, does what I do matter or does it not matter? And a nihilistic person will say it doesn't matter. What I do doesn't matter. And Nietzsche said that's what would happen first. The world would turn very nihilistic, and then what would happen after that? Totalitarianism would set in. And he was exactly right. Another contemporary of Nietzsche's, Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. Anyone read that book? Crime and Punishment. It's a story of a man who whips him up over a long period of time, whips himself up into actually committing a murder. He has to justify a murder. And so he goes through this long psychological drama. It's all taking place in his head. Now, Dostoevsky's a contemporary of Nietzsche. And I think that psychological trauma that Dostoevsky was talking about, you see reflected in Hitler in some ways, and I'll come back to that as we get toward the end here. Okay, so Hitler's raised as a good little Catholic boy. What does he want to do in life? Well, he wants to be an artist. He does have some artistic abilities. I could actually show you some pictures of Hitler art. I usually do it to my in my U.S. History 2 classes, and when we teach the Holocaust, I show pictures of Hitler's art. Every once in a while, works of his are sold. Almost always they're bought by anonymous buyers. Why? Because people don't want to have their name associated with Hitler art. But if you would look at it, your first reaction would probably be this. It's not nearly as bad as I thought it would be. Yeah. There are problems with it, and for those that teach the humanities that know about the centric point system and receding and processional lines, the true specialists on art, they could tell you there's some problems with his artwork, and it's true. He had some problems with it. All right, so he leaves home and tries to go to art school, right? And at the time, if you want to be an artist, you've got to get into an art school because it's not like today. Today, you can just create a piece of artwork and take a picture of it and put it on the internet, and boom, you could sell it that way. Well, back then, that's not the way it worked. Back then, what you had to do was get your art placed in some kind of gallery, right? So you're a gallery owner, you've got limited wall space, you want artwork on the walls that's going to sell. And so you want someone that people know their name, some artwork that you know is going to be attractive to the public. And in order for Hitler to meet that standard, he's got to go to art school. So he goes to Vienna, the capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and he tries to get into art school. It's either 3 or 4 times. Every time he's rejected. Now imagine you have a dream about how you're going to live your life, and then your dream's shattered. What kind of impact does that have on you? So Hitler ends up living in what is the equivalent, I guess, today of a YMCA, and barely scraping by. He's sitting outside the train station, hand painting very small, very, very detailed little postcards. Hitler is a high order individual, and I'll tell you what that means in a minute. Very high order, very detail oriented individual, especially in the world of the arts. He always thought of himself as an artist or an architect. And that's why one of his closest associates is Albert Speer, this other German architect that Hitler sort of picked up, and he became part of the Hitler inner circle. All right, so imagine you've got your dream in life to be an artist, and it's destroyed now, and you're living just kind of as a homeless guy, barely making enough money to eat. And then what happens? Well, the First World War erupts. And there's a very famous picture out there, and it's taken from the plaza right next to the Imperial Palace in Vienna, the palace of the Habsburg dynasty. And I don't know who did it, but there's a massive crowd there, and they've just announced that the First World War has been declared. And Hitler's in the crowd, and someone's found him, and they've actually circled his face and then blown it up in this picture so that you can see the expression on his face. And the expression is one of excitement and joy. He's found another purpose for his existence. So what he does is he's going to now join the military, but he doesn't want to be part of the Austro-Hungarian military. He wants to be part of the German military. So he's going to cross over into Bavaria, the southern state of Germany, and join a Bavarian regiment, part of the Imperial German Army. Now, why did he do that? Why didn't he become a member of the Austro-Hungarian Army? Well, frankly, while he was in Vienna, he was disgusted by what he saw. He was disgusted. That's an important word, disgust. D-I-S-G-U-S-T. Clinical psychologists now, they're able to show that there is a small percentage of the population, it's actually, I think, 0.6% of people are high order people. These people are very productive. And I'm saying these things about Hitler because after having read and studied him as much as I have, I've come to the conclusion he fits this model. Just so you know, I have been taught by people that actually knew Hitler and met Hitler. And when I was at my undergraduate work in University of Tennessee, I was instructed by a fellow Dr. Wilhelm Haas. He met Hitler. He taught me a class on Hitler, and he introduced to me a book by a fellow named John Toland, who really used to be the sort of guy you went to read about Hitler. The Toland book was very thick and it was quite intimidating, taking this course from Dr. Haas. But Haas is actually a very fascinating individual too. I don't want to get too much astray, but there's a very last video that's made of Hitler right before he commits suicide in the bunker in Berlin. And in this video, what he does is he comes out of the bunker and he's walking down a line, and they're a line of schoolboys. These are Hitler Youth, kids from, say 10 to about 15 years old, and Hitler's giving them all medals, Iron Crosses. And it turns out that Dr. Haas was one of these kids, and Hitler pinned a medal on him. Why? Because Dr. Haas had destroyed 3 Soviet tanks with a very primitive bazooka-like device called a Panzerfaust. Tells you a little bit about Dr. Haas. Okay, so he was the guy very much that influenced me and encouraged me to keep on studying about Hitler. Now, I first got interested in Hitler, I guess when I was very little. I have 2 older brothers. Both of them were guys big into history. They ended up parlaying their history degrees, going on to law school. But growing up the youngest of 3 sons, you got 2 older brothers, you're always going to do what your older brothers are doing, right? And they were fascinated by World War II. And so as a little kid, I used to sit down with technical manuals. It's actually pretty crazy now that I think about it, but I would sit down with these technical manuals, memorizing every weapon used by everybody in the entire World War II. And, back then we didn't have the internet and we didn't have all this TV stuff like it's available today. We basically had, 3 channels, maybe 4 if it would come in, you could work the rabbit ears right. But we spent our time making models, almost always World War II models. Playing with our G.I. Joes and studying about the war. And so I, as a kid, had spent a lot of time learning about the weapons of war. It wasn't until I probably hit my teenage years that I started thinking about war beyond just the weapons that people use. Started thinking about tactics and strategy. And then when I got to the University of Tennessee, I was on a ROTC scholarship. I was going to be commissioned an officer in the United States Army, an armored cavalry officer, a tank officer. And so at that point, I started becoming more informed about strategy. Now, tactics are how you fight a battle, but the strategy is how do you win the war. And we'll come back to that here in just a minute. Okay, so back to where we are at with Hitler, and he was in Vienna. And while he was in Vienna, he saw something that was disturbing to him, and that was the multicultural aspect of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Hitler was disgusted by that. Now, as I said, today, psychoanalysts looking at him, they would say this guy's probably a high-order guy, and I agree. I think so. He's a high-order guy. Now, high-order people, what are they? They are very industrious. They're very productive people. They can also be incredibly judgmental. And cleanliness is a big thing about it. How many of you know Hitler bathed at least 3 or 4 times a day? He's big on personal hygiene. His diet was very peculiar. He was vegetarian, strict vegetarian. It caused him to develop a terrible case of halitosis. So anyone that walked in around Hitler would have noticed he had terrible breath, and Hitler was constantly trying to disguise that. The thing about high-order people is that if they get disgusted with things, they want to destroy them. Okay. And what Hitler saw in the Austro-Hungarian Empire then disgusted him. He didn't want to have any part of it. So he goes and joins the German army. And for 4 years, he's going to fight on the Western Front. 4 years in the trenches. You and I cannot imagine what that would have been like. Fighting in the trenches. And by all accounts, he's a pretty brave guy. He wins an award. He wins an Iron Cross. We have the officer evaluation reports for Hitler, and they all say the same thing, though. They say he has zero leadership ability. Zero leadership ability. Now, this is a guy that's going to go on and lead 75 million German people to a near apocalyptic end in 1945. He has zero leadership ability. Why? Well, honestly, I think it's because Hitler doesn't relate to other people in a normal fashion, or what we would consider normal. When Hitler wants to talk as a soldier, he wants to talk about politics, and only politics. And soldiers don't want to talk about politics. Soldiers want to talk about really one or two things: food or their girlfriend. That's it. Guy starts talking politics, you got other things you want to think about. I want to think about a hamburger. Right? So Hitler just wants to talk about politics, which is why, despite the fact that he serves for 4 years, and it's during time of war where people above him in rank are constantly being killed, he only raises himself up one step in rank, from private to corporal. That's it. And the reason's pretty obvious why they don't promote him higher than that is because any rank higher than a corporal, he's going to be in command of a squad or a platoon. He would be in charge of soldiers. And as his officer reports make very clear, he has no leadership ability. So you don't want to put this guy in that position. That's what his commanding officers, writing his evaluation reports, wrote time and time again. All right, so he's in the trenches, though, for 4 years. And you and I, like I say, cannot imagine what that would have been like. Especially under a massive bombardment, an artillery bombardment, where you're sitting there and you're watching people next to you be blown up, and you're just waiting for that one shell that you don't hear go over your head. That's the one that's got your name on it. You know, later on, they'll develop a term, shell shock. Today, we call it PTSD. He's went through 4 years of what would have to be absolutely scarring psychologically. You know, there's one story about Hitler in World War I where he's sitting with a bunch of 7 or 8 mates, buddies of his, and they're sitting around talking. And Hitler gets up for some reason. I think it's to go get some water. And he gets the water and he turns around to head back to his group of friends that are just sitting there. And a mortar round comes in and hits right in the middle where these guys were sitting, and all of them are killed. In fact, one of them is just vaporized. Now think about what kind of psychological effect that would have on you. All right, now let's be real clear. I'm not trying to excuse any of Hitler's actions. We're just trying to understand what happened and why it happened, okay? All right. So Hitler watches his friends get killed, but he doesn't get killed. And I think it's there that he starts believing that maybe he has some kind of higher purpose. God, some force of nature has saved him from being killed just like all these other people. And he begins starting to think he's special. He's really special. All right. Hitler gets out of the army. The war ends. Hitler actually was in a hospital when the war ended. He had been caught up in a chemical gas attack, and he was suffering in the hospital when they told him that the war had ended. So now he's a guy that had great visions for himself. Then he got caught up in the war. Now the war's gone badly. Germany's lost. What's he going to do? And he's sort of wallowing in despair at the time. And along comes a German officer, and this German officer's got a job for Hitler. and that is to spy on a brand new political party that had just popped up in Bavaria, right outside of Munich. This was the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the National Socialist Deutsche Arbeitsparty, National Socialism. And Hitler is asked by this officer to go and spy on these guys, because at the time, Germany was becoming incredibly radicalized. People don't know this, but in the aftermath of the First World War, the communists, they attempted to take over Germany. It was called the Spartacus Putsch. And the only thing that stopped them from succeeding was these southern Germans. You know, Germany's much like the United States. The farther north you go, you find people tend to be more liberal. The farther south you go, people tend to be more conservative. Same is true in Germany. Up north, they tend to be more Protestant, Lutheran, and they're more liberal, and farther down south, more Catholic, traditional, conservative. Okay, so Hitler is going to be spying on this party. Well, the southern Germans had united and formed their own military organization called the Freikorps, and it marched on Berlin and defeated the communists and saved Germany from being taken over by the communists. The Freikorps, though, they tried to seize government. It didn't work. The people refused to go to work, and the Freikorps ended up dissolving, and you ended up with the Weimar government in Germany running the show. But they didn't do a very effective job of it. We know that. During the time of the Weimar government, that's when hyperinflation hits Germany. That's when everyone saw the economy go to ruins. So Hitler goes and he starts watching these people talk from this National Socialist German Workers' Party, and he starts to like what he hears, very much so. And he ends up joining, and got a picture of his party card that still survives. His party number was number 7. Hitler's a numerologist. He thinks that certain numbers are special, and the number 7 for him is really special. In fact, what's the swastika? 4 7s reversed, yes. It's actually a Vedic good luck symbol. All right, so Hitler is going to be party member number 7. Actually, he's party member 535, but they gave him card number 7. Why? Because he's the guy running the show. And now Hitler goes out and starts speaking. And now we get to Jung's comment here about how Hitler embodied the sentiment of the German people. What does he mean by that? Well, Hitler didn't start off being a great speaker. He ended up becoming a very effective speaker, but he didn't start off even being good, mediocre. It's not something that came natural to him. He studied body language from a magician who taught him these very powerful arm gestures. And if you watch Hitler speak, he certainly knows how to use his body, and he understood the human psyche. He always showed up to speeches 15 to 20 minutes late, knowing that the crowd would be more and more agitated. And then he would show up and he would stand behind the podium, the crowd would get silent, and then he would just continue standing there. And what's happening to the crowd? If I just stand here for a minute, what's going to happen? And then he'll start speaking. He starts off in very hushed tones. And then as he goes on, he gets louder and louder and louder until at the end, he's pouring sweat. He's screaming at the top of his lungs. I've watched a lot of Hitler's speeches, and I can tell you, I do speak the German language, so I can understand what he's saying. But even if you couldn't, you would still come away thinking, wow, he has some charisma. He's a charismatic guy. And he was. Or he learned how to be. So he takes over this political party. All right, well, fast forward to 1933, and now the Nazis are in power, and now he has unlimited power as a result of being given the enabling law. he now can do whatever he wants. And the first thing he does is he abolishes the office of the presidency, and he creates a new position, der Führer, which is German for just the leader. It's actually a rather innocuous term, Führer, the leader. And he sees himself as an embodiment of the German people. And here's where Jung's comment really comes in. When Hitler is speaking to the German people, there's a dialogue taking place. Hitler, as he speaks, he'll make a point, and then he'll step back and he'll watch the crowd's reaction. He'll make another point, and this time the crowd will clap. Makes another point, no reaction. Makes another point, boy, people stand up and cheer. Okay, well, he knows what to do next time. The next time he's going to come in, he's going to hit those points that he knows are going to get the crowd to react. What's he doing? He's mirroring the German people. The German people of the audience. He's taking in what he knows they want to hear, and he's feeding it back to them. That's what Jung means. That's what he means in that comment. So Hitler is speaking to the German people, watching how they react to him, and then sort of this feedback loop is created, and he's giving them what they want. That's why you can't separate the German people from what occurred in the Holocaust. You can't say, oh, the blame should be only on Hitler and the top Nazis that were directing these people, and they were just following orders. No, that's wrong. Okay, so now Hitler has unlimited power. And one of the first things that they start doing is passing these Nuremberg laws, race laws, where every German citizen is required to create a genealogy and prove their racial purity, that they don't have any undesired blood in them. Hitler's a big believer in this Aryan myth. There's something to it. This is one of the problems when you start studying Hitler and his ideology, is that what you'll find is there may be a little piece of truth, and then there's distortion all around it. But there's a little bit of truth there. Now, Hitler, he's developing his thoughts. You can't say that in 1933 he knew exactly where he was going to go. It's something that he teaches himself as a result of him interacting with the German people over a 3 or 4 year period. But now he's got the enabling laws passed. These German people are required to prove their racial purity. Now, it is tied with this Aryan concept, and it is true that there were these people known as the Aryans that began migrating at the beginning of the Bronze Age, and some of them went down to India and created the Vedic culture there, Hinduism. And some of them, many people like Goethe and Alan Bloomberg, guys that were writing books that Hitler was reading, they argued that some of these Aryans got up into Northern Europe where it was cold, and there weren't very many people living there, they argued. And that's important because Hitler's a big believer in a concept called miscegenation, the mixing of the breeds. Now, Hitler would say the rest of the world was, for the most part, miscegenated. That when the Aryan peoples got down to India, for instance, there was a pre-Vedic culture already there, and the Aryan people interbred with them, and when they did so, they lost their racial purity. But Hitler believed that the Aryan peoples that got up into northwestern Europe, there were no people for them to interbreed with. So the Germanic peoples, the people of Germany, Holland, Belgium, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Great Britain, and even parts of the United States, those people, he argued, maintained their racial purity. Now, Hitler was a big fan of the German composer Wagner. Wagner wrote these operas about mythological German folk heroes. But Wagner was also an anti-Semite. Certainly Conrad Wagner was. Richard, slightly less so than his brother. But Wagner was a big influence on Hitler. And there's a very famous quote that Wagner made: "The Jew is the demon of the world." Now, Hitler's not just a fan of Wagner's music. He actually dated and wanted to marry Wagner's daughter. She didn't want to have anything to do with him. Later on she did. But initially, when he started making advances on her, she wasn't interested. She thought he was beneath him, or beneath her. All right, so now Hitler has unlimited power, and he's forcing the German people to produce documents showing their racial purity. All right. Now, for him, why is that important? Well, he wants to maintain the racial purity of the Germanic peoples and produce a superior man through selective breeding. And the Nazis attempted that. It was called the Lebensborn program. About 30,000 children were born as part of the Lebensborn program. Today, they're all in their 80s and 90s, and I can tell you from personal experience, the general population of Germany shuns these people. They don't want to have a whole lot to do with them. Why? Because these kids were raised by the German state to be good little Nazis. I think a lot of them still are sympathetic to the Nazi ideology. All right, so everyone in Germany is forced to prove that they are racially pure. And those that can't, Hitler wants to have them removed. He looks at it as almost an athlete getting ready to go and perform in say a marathon. All right, well, do you want to have the flu if you're going to go run a marathon? Of course not. You want to have a healthy body. And so Hitler sees the Germanic people as generally healthy, but within that body politic are groups that he's disgusted by, that he wants removed. And who are these people? Well, they're gypsies, homosexuals, Jews, communists. He hates the communists. He saw what the communists did when they took over the Soviet Union, what they did in the Ukraine. He thought of them as the great enemy to global security. Okay, so now everybody in Germany is having to prove their racial purity to the German state. And Germany now begins the Second World War, attacks Poland. Now, even before then, the Nazis had created this breeding program, but they had also gone the other way too. They had started a euthanasia program. People that were physically handicapped, mentally handicapped, these children were taken from their parents, taken to a German state-run hospital, and there they were given a shot, and they were put to sleep permanently. The parents back home would receive a letter: "We're sorry to inform you your child fell down the steps and cracked his skull. We tried everything medically possible. We couldn't save your child." The reality is they had murdered your child. So the Nazis had done that really starting in 1933. Okay, by 1939 now, Germany invades Poland. It continues from there. 1940, France. 1941, Russia, or the Soviet Union, rather. Now, in all these areas, including Germany, that the Germans had conquered, Hitler wanted to do exactly what he had already been doing in Germany: ethnically cleansing those people that he thought were socially and politically undesirable. And the methodologies are something that the Germans are going to have to learn. That's another thing that you'll pick up pretty quickly when you start studying about the Holocaust, is that there's a learning curve here. You know, it's one thing to say I'm going to kill 6 or 8 or 10 million people. It's another thing to do it. How do you do it? Well, you got to learn. Initially, it's really simple, I guess. Just shoot them. So, 1941, when the Germans invade the Soviet Union, the German army, well, I won't say the German army, the SS, is ordered to create 6 what are called Einsatzgruppen. They are killing squads. You know that term Einsatzgruppen, it's a very innocuous term. Einsatz just means sort of reserve. And if you had been reading about these guys, you'd think, well, it's just a reserve group. You're not interested in what a reserve group is doing. They're not fighting in the battle that you're interested in hearing about. You want to hear about the fighting that's going on in the front line. These are just reserve group guys. And that's done for a purpose. I mean, the Nazis don't want to advertise to the world what it is they're doing. So these Einsatzgruppen now are tasked with going out and finding Jews, especially, and shooting them. And they're incredibly efficient in some ways. They'll kill between 1.1 and 1.2 million Jewish people between 1941 and the spring of 1942. So in a 7 or 8 month period, 1.1 million Jewish people are shot. And those records survive. Anyone out there that wants to deny the Holocaust, like I said, this is the most well-documented event in all of human history. If you want to deny it, then you're either naive or just historically lazy. You don't want to look for it. Maybe you have your own agenda and it just doesn't fit in with how you view the world, so you're not interested in that information. But it's out there. The Einsatzgruppen were sending in weekly reports, and those who survived, we know exactly how many Jews were being killed by each Einsatzgruppen every week. And the SS commanders are urging them on, kill more and more. But there were a couple of problems with it. The first one was there's a cost associated with bullets, 2 cents or so per bullet. Costs money. Well, is there a cheaper way to kill people? They would ask. The second thing is this: not everybody that gets shot gets killed. For instance, the Germans come in, a place called Babi Yar, and they force 40,000 Jews into a narrow ravine, and there they start shooting them. Problem for the Germans is that not all these people that get shot died, and some of them wait until the Nazis leave and they crawl out, and now they start telling people what's happened. The Nazis don't want the world to know what's going on. They understand that there may be consequences for their actions if the rest of the world knows about it, so they're wanting to keep it quiet. Now, they're not willing to keep it quiet in a way that's going to interfere with what they're doing. No. Okay. And then really there's also a third problem, although I'm kind of hesitant to bring it up, but it's a problem for the Germans who are doing this. And you got to understand what's motivating them in order to understand why this is occurring. And then also, again, the question of could it happen again? And that's this. There is a psychological toll being enacted on these German soldiers that are shooting these people. I mean, think about it. What kind of effect would it have on you to shoot 300 or 400 babies in the face? The German soldiers of the Einsatzgruppen, they're constantly drinking. In fact, a lot of times they get so drunk they can't even hardly aim their weapons, and that doesn't make them efficient killers. That means maybe you're just going to wound the guy and they'll escape and be able to tell the world what's going on. You know, the head of the SS, Heinrich Himmler, visits some of the Einsatzgruppen, talks to the Einsatzgruppen commanders and asks them, what's your biggest concern? And is it having enough bullets or having enough gas or trucks? No. Their biggest concern is, you know, our soldiers are kind of having problems with doing this. It's not coming natural to them. Even though they had already been steeped in this ideology it still seemed unnatural to some of them to shoot a baby in the back of the head. All right, so now the Nazis began looking at another way to kill people. And in Western Poland, there's a castle, and I've been there. It's called Castle Chełmno. And when you're driving up to it, it's a beautiful small white castle. It's not a big thing. It's a very small castle. But at Castle Chełmno, the SS, the Nazis have been working on something. The guy there had come up with an idea of using furniture vans, just regular furniture vans, without any windows in the box in the back, packing people in like sardines, and then taking just a regular garden hose, attaching it to the exhaust pipe of the vehicle, running the other end into a small opening you cut into the side of the panel van, and then starting the engine and letting the engine run for 45 minutes or so. Killing these people using carbon monoxide. After 45 minutes, you open the doors, the people are dead, you just have to unstack the bodies, take them out, and burn them. And what the Germans would do is they would always save some of the Jewish people, the Jewish men, to do the labor for them. The Germans don't want to do this kind of work. They'll have the Jewish men do it. And when they're left to carry out the instructions of the Germans like this, they're referred to as the Sonderkommando. And later on, I'll talk to you about a guy named Primo Levi, who worked as a Sonderkommando in the camp at Auschwitz. What happened to him is an interesting story. All right, so at Castle Chełmno, they began putting Jews, packing them into furniture vans and killing them with carbon monoxide. And it works, at least from the point of view of the German High Command. This is a successful way of killing these people. And you don't have any of the psychological issues that you do with the Einsatzgruppen by killing them using carbon monoxide gas. You could say to yourself, oh, these people are just going to sleep. It's a painless death. All right. Well, now you're in the spring of 1942. Germany has conquered, a third of the Soviet Union. Its armies have pushed all the way out to Moscow. And throughout Europe, Jews are going to be round up. Now, while the Einsatzgruppen were running around shooting people, in the big urban centers, the Jewish people were being collected into ghettos where they were being held until the final solution was carried out. And what it was going to be was actually defined later on at a conference called the Wannsee Conference. All right, so now the German High Command says, we like this way of killing these people, carbon monoxide poisoning. Now, the head of the German SS, the guy Heinrich Himmler, his job was to make sure that all the German people were racially pure. The SS soldiers themselves had to be able to prove racial purity back 4 generations. Couldn't have any Jewish blood all the way back to your great-great-grandparents. Right, this guy, Himmler, it's his job to kill the Jews. Well, he has a lieutenant, basically, that works for him, a guy named Reinhard Heydrich. And Heydrich was based in Prague, Czechoslovakia. And he was a very efficient killer, Heydrich. He managed the Einsatzgruppen. Very effective manager type. Hitler loved him. He thought he was the prototypical Aryan. Heydrich was 6'2" or 6'3", blonde hair, striking blue eyes. And Hitler thought those physiological characteristics were optimal. That was the perfect German, the perfect Nazi for Hitler. Okay, so Heydrich, though, one day is driving to work, and what happens? He's assassinated. There was a couple of Czechoslovakian resistance fighters that had gone to England and been trained by the English OSS, and they had been parachuted into Czechoslovakia specifically to kill this guy, Heydrich. Why? Because the world now was starting to know what was going on, and they made the connection to Heydrich. Well, kill this guy, kill the head of the snake, and then the rest of the snake will die. So they killed Heydrich. Well, for Hitler, what that meant was it's time to accelerate the process. Let's move it faster. And so he ordered the implementation of what's called Operation Reinhardt. And what this is they're going to build 3 camps: Sobibor, Belzec, and Treblinka. And these 3 camps are all going to be in Poland. They're not going to be in Germany, where the German people that Hitler has to interact with on a daily basis could see what's going on. They're going to be off in Poland. And I've been to the sites of Sobibor and Treblinka. If you go there today, it's pretty interesting. There's a forest there, and it's all pine trees. You know, when the Nazis realized the Soviets at the end of the war were pushing and you're going to liberate these lands, they didn't want anybody finding what they had done, right? They rapidly ordered other Jews to dig up the Jewish bodies that they had already killed and burn them, incinerate them. But back in these 3 camps, what they did was they essentially bulldozed them, and then they planted pine trees. And the reason they planted pine trees is that A, pine trees go pretty rapidly, and B, pine trees give off an aroma, one that would mask that of rotting flesh. Now those 3 camps, Belzec, Treblinka, and Sobibor, I've seen them referred to as concentration camps. They are not concentration camps. In fact, I don't even think of them as camps. Think of them as killing machines, because that's all they are. They are killing machines. People don't live in those camps except the camp guards. What happens is a trainload of Jews comes in. Generally, these are Jews that are being brought in from the major Polish cities, Lodz, Warsaw, and they're brought in by train, generally about 1,500 people on a train. And they bring in the train, and the people are told to get off the train, and they're told, you're going to be resettled in the Soviet Union. This is just a stop so that A, you can get a shower, and B, be deloused. Lice is a big problem. Now, these people have been packed into these trains already for 2 or 3 days without food or water. They just wanted to be able to get off the train car. You could understand that. They didn't realize what was next. Once they got off the train car, they were run through what's called the chute. If you guys have been to Dollywood, you know there's an area over in Dollywood where if it's really hot, they've got like spraying water spritzing on you, right? You gotta go get in the shade, gotta chill out for a little bit. Yeah, okay. That's the chute. And often the Germans have music playing in the background. Sometimes it's Wagner. They like to do that sort of a twist of irony there. Often the Germans would capture very famous Jewish musicians, and they would have them play in the chute. And the idea was this: you want to keep the children calm, because if the children start freaking out, mommies start freaking out, and if mommies start freaking out, daddies are going to start freaking out. And you don't want that. You don't have that many guards. You don't want these people all of a sudden just trying breaking and running. No, you want to keep it calm all the way up to the last second. So these people then are taken through the chute. They're listening to calming, soothing music. They're taken into a room, and there they have their heads shaved. And they're sent to a building that they're told is a shower facility. So they're now stripped naked. All their belongings are taken into another building, and they're sorted by a group of Sonderkommando. For every train load that got off, 60, 80 of the Jewish men were picked, and they were saved till the very last. And right now, while the rest of these people were going to the chambers, their job was to sort all the stuff that the people had brought with them in the suitcases, especially looking for jewelry, anything of value. All right, so now you're a Jewish person, and you come out of the chute and you go into this building, and they look like cinder block buildings. That's it, just basic cinder block buildings. And you could put about 150 in each building. In each one of these camps, they had 4 buildings. So you could do it 600 at a time. Train 1,500 people, you're gonna have to do this 2.5 times. If you were very efficient, and the Germans were big on efficiency, You could kill 1,500 people like this in about an hour and 45 minutes. But you ran the first group in, they didn't realize until the last second that this isn't a shower facility, it's something else. The Germans put shower heads in the buildings, but there's no plumbing attaching to water source, nothing like that. And you'd get in there then as a person, you realize, well, there's no water coming on, what's next? And then you'd hear outside the building the engine start. Then people would start coughing, and then people would start dying, carbon monoxide. In those 3 camps, over the course of 11-month period, 11 months, 1.8 million people are killed. Think about it. 1.8 million people are killed like that. The problem for the Germans is this doesn't work for them quite the way they want it to work. First off, not everybody dies. Sometimes when the fresh air hits these people, somebody's still alive. And that doesn't look good. Especially if you got a group waiting to go in. Now you got to pull that guy out and put him behind the building and shoot him. That's a problem. And there's another problem, and that is resources. Germany doesn't have oil. It's got coal, but it doesn't have oil. The Germans are almost entirely dependent on the country of Romania for their oil. We know that, the Allies do, and we bombed the hell out of it. It's a place called Ploiești in Romania. The German army, at the end of the war, runs out of gas. I mean, people think that the Germans don't have any fighter planes or tanks and they lose the war because of that. That's not true. Germans had plenty of tanks, plenty of planes at the end of the war. They ran out of fuel. So let me ask you then, can you afford to use fuel to kill people and not run your tanks? Well, Hitler ordered them to keep on using the fuel. Now, that seems rather illogical, doesn't it? I mean, I always worked under the assumption that Adolf Hitler wanted to win World War II. But maybe that's wrong. Maybe that's an incorrect assumption. It presumes that Adolf Hitler is a logical guy. You know, if you cannot determine what a person's motivation is, Jung says, I think it's Jung, says that what you want to do is this. You want to look at what is the result of that person's actions and then see what you can infer from that. Okay. So here in Germany, you could have a choice. You could say this, you know, we're expending a lot of effort to kill these people, and it's actually costing us in the war effort. And it's true. You know, in 1941, the German army's fighting in Russia. It's super cold, and instead of the trains carrying winter equipment to help these German soldiers, the trains are busy carrying Jews to the Reinhard death camps. Now you think, well, you know, if you want to win the war, then what would you do? You would just take the gypsies and the Jews and you would enslave them and have them work for the war, win the war, and then when you're finished winning the war, what would you do? Then you would get rid of these people. But that's not what the Nazis do. The Nazis, even as they're losing the war more and more so as time goes on, 1943, 44, what does Hitler do? He demands more resources are used to kill the Jews more rapidly. He wants more chaos. So what can you infer? What was his goal? To win the war? Or to kill the Jewish people? All right. So the carbon monoxide thing works okay, but by the end of 1942-43, the tide is turned and the German army starts losing in Russia. The Russian army starts advancing. Now, one thing about Hitler, I told you earlier, is this guy is a high order person, right? High order. And high order people are all about cleanliness. They aren't, like I say, very judgmental, they're industrious, but they're all about cleanliness and hygiene. You know, in 1933, when the Nazis took over, one of the first things that Hitler did is he ordered all of the factories be fumigated. Make it a safer working environment for the German worker. You know what they used to fumigate the German factories? It's called Zyklon B. Zyklon B. It's a nerve agent. It's an insecticide, a pesticide. Now, I know from personal experience, I worked at the United States Army Officers Club in Frankfurt. It used to be the IG Farben company headquarters. IG Farben is the German company that produced Zyklon B. And Hitler now thinks this will work. We can switch from carbon monoxide to Zyklon B. High order people, easily disgusted. How do you kill something that you're disgusted by? It's as if these human beings are vermin. They're insects. And you want to kill them the same way. So Zyklon B. And this leads then to the creation of the great killing instrument, Auschwitz. Auschwitz. In Auschwitz, they built 6 killing chambers. And when you go there, it's very creepy. You know, the camps at Dachau and Auschwitz, both of them have a big sign when you come through the front gate, and you've probably heard this, Arbeit macht frei. Work will make you free. It's sick, it's twisted in its sickness. Because what is it doing? It's offering the person that comes through that gate hope, right? Work will make you free. There's no hope for you here. There's no hope. As a little kid, I was fascinated by that. Arbeit macht frei. You know what? My last name's Frei. My family heritage, my German family heritage. My father's family is German. They immigrated here in the 1600s. But I always thought of myself as being part German. And since Germany was responsible for this atrocity, I assumed some of that guilt. And I think part of that was from spending so much time in Germany, this collective guilt that the German people feel today, and rightly so. Rightly so. Now in Auschwitz, they built 6 of these death chambers. And some of the Jewish men are chosen to be Sonderkommando, right? And the way this works is this. When you go there, like I say, the death chambers look like dirt mounds. That's it. At least from the front side, that's all you see is like a grassy mound. And they're not even very high, maybe 8 feet high or so. And the people that were getting ready to go into them, they would have been gathered around outside, sitting down on the grass, waiting their turn. Then you descend down steps. And for these people, it would have been as if they were descending into hell. By this time, most of them knew what was happening. And they would get down to the bottom, and there's a big room. It opens up, and there's all kinds of coat hangers everywhere. And they're told, put your coats, your jackets, all of your clothes here. You're going in to be taking a shower. Hang all your stuff here. And they even went to the trouble of giving them a number and say, put the number on your clothes, because when you get finished with the shower, you want to be able to match your number with your clothes. You're never going to see your clothes again. But that's what they're told. And it's all part of the charade. Don't let these people know exactly what's going to happen. Now, like I say, by this time, most of these people had heard stories. They had a good idea of what was coming. But they went anyway. they win anyway. And you got to wonder why. Well, you know, there's a experiment. It's called the Asch experiment. And it's really pretty interesting. It works like this. I could draw two lines on the board here, two lines, and make them exactly equal in length, right? And here's what I would do is I would prep my whole class except for one student. And I would say, okay, here's what we're going to do. When this guy comes in, we're going to all pretend like one of those lines is bigger than the others, right? All right, so now the whole class is together. And I would say, all right, everybody, look at the two lines on the board. And I would go to you and I would say, okay, do they look equal? And you'd say, no, looks to me like one of those lines is bigger than the other. I'd go to you and you'd say, yeah, I can see a difference. One of them's longer than the other one. And then I would finally get to that person that didn't know, I hadn't told them, right? And what would they say?
Same thing.
Yeah, they'd say the same thing. Yeah. Oh yeah, I see one line's bigger than the other. Now, why that's happening? Peer pressure? You don't want to go against the grain, you don't want to go against the crowd. Maybe that's why these people went. But then they went into the chambers. And they would get in there, and I'll show you what one of them looked like. Is that turned on? No. Turned on. I've pulled up a picture here of one of the 6 death chambers at Auschwitz. Now, over the course of a year period or so, something on the order of 1.2 million people are going to be killed. And since you got to divide that by 6, it's roughly 250,000 people are going to be killed in this one room that I'm going to show you. Maybe it'll work. All right. Okay. Now, these people are packed in there like sardines. The next thing that happens is an SS guy walking along the roof comes to a little opening, and there he takes these blue crystal Zyklon B pellets and he pours them into a small container of water. And as soon as the Zyklon B hits the water, it vaporizes, and since the vapor's heavier than air, it then falls down into the chamber. Yeah. Now this is one of the 6 death chambers there at Auschwitz. Think of it. Doesn't look like much of a room. Over 200,000 people were killed in that room alone. 200,000. The numbers are staggering. And if anyone wants to deny it, I can show you the paper trail. I can show you the number, the tattoo number of every person that went through that chamber. The evidence is there. You know, we've got great sources. Yad Vashem is an amazing resource. Yad Vashem. Now, can you imagine what's going on here? People start choking. They can't breathe. They can see a small opening up at the top where the pellets have been introduced. They see that little light, and what do they think? Maybe if I can get up there, I can breathe. So they start climbing on top of each other. And as time goes by, just seconds, they're ripping and clawing and tearing at each other, all fighting to try and get to that little spot where they think they can breathe. And who's going to be down at the very bottom? The babies. And to make it even worse, amongst the blood and the gore and the people being smashed on the floor, is that when this nerve agent takes effect, it essentially shuts down your autonomic nervous system. Your heart stops beating, you'll stop respiring. You lose control of your bodily functions. And so now there's human waste, feces, and urine everywhere. Now, who's going to clean up? It's not going to be the Nazis. No. The Nazis will use the Jews to clean up the mess. They're the pests. They're the vermin. Let them clean the mess up. It's disgusting. So the Sonderkommando then come in and they haul the bodies out. And look right over here. You know what that is? That's an oven. It's crazy world we live in today. If you die in Germany today and you decide you're going to be cremated, you have a 90% probability that you'll be cremated in an oven made by the exact same company in Germany that made those ovens right there. You can profit on war in more than one way. Now, the Sonderkommando take these people out into here. And I'll go and pull up another slide here in just a second. You can see how close the room is. It's adjacent, yes? There you go. So, what do you have here? You have rails that come up, and then attached to these rails are stainless steel stretchers. And what you would do, you're one of these Jewish men, this is your job. They would serve for 6 weeks, and above the facility is actually a little barracks room where these guys lived. They lived right above this. This is all they did for 6 weeks, nonstop. Right? So they would come down and they would take those bodies out of their room that I just showed you, and then they would throw them on these stainless steel tables, and then they got to slam the bodies in. And after you pack 2 or 3 in there, well, how do you fit more? Now you get a guy who actually has a ramer. It's got a flat edge to it, and it's a rounded top, and a big long pole, and you get 2 or 3 guys grabbing on that thing, and they're just ramming bodies in it, packing it as tightly as possible. And then the fire goes. But not everything's destroyed. You're left with bone and ash, and that has to be collected. It's also in the air, everywhere, everywhere. And so the Sonderkommando, as they're working, they're breathing in the ash of their dead family members. Remember I told you I was going to talk to you about Primo Levi. Primo Levi's an Italian Jew. The Italians were one of the last groups of Jews to be taken to the camps. Why? Because Italy was an ally of Germany. It wasn't until 1943 that the Italian Jews were taken. And they went to Auschwitz. And Primo Levi worked as a Sonderkommando. This was his job. He survived. Wrote a couple amazing books. If you're interested in them, one of them's called The Gray Zone. You should read it. You see what it was like, how the Germans dehumanized these people. They treated them worse than dogs, because in the German minds, they are worse than dogs. They are vermin. They are insects. They are disgusting creatures. And how do you kill something that you're disgusted by? How do you kill a disease? By fire. That's how you do it. You guys are probably all fans of The Walking Dead, right? How many times have you seen them on The Walking Dead, the zombie piled up, and they throw all the gas on top of them and burn them? Because otherwise, how are you going to be sure that it's completely eradicated? Now the Sonderkommando, here, Primo Levi's working, he's breathing it in. He actually had to ram home his mother, his grandmother, a sister, and 2 nieces. And then as they burned, he breathed their ashes into his lungs. The gray zone. Ash everywhere. The Germans liked that. They thought that was incredibly efficient. Use an insecticide on a human. Save fuel. Still, the resources involved here to kill these people. You're back to that question that as a guy that studied military history, strategy, and tactics, I always wondered, why didn't the Germans just stop doing this and put all these resources that they're using to kill these people to winning the war? You can always kill these people later. But what's the title of my lecture? How Hitler's even more evil than you already thought. Because we got to think like Jung says, we got to infer what was his goal here. And what was it? What happened as Germany started losing the war? Did they slow down? Did they enslave the Jews and use them as forced labor? No, they accelerated the killing process. They accelerated the chaos. And what I infer from that is that Hitler didn't care about winning the war. And in fact, when Germany lost the war, he could turn around and say, well, the German people have failed me. What was his real goal all along? Always. The destruction of European Jewry. And he was an evil man. Evil man. Now, last thing before we're finished. Can it happen again? I used to think no. Maybe only under the right circumstances, but in general, no. I've now come full circle. I think it's inevitable. It's not if, it's when. Because we have these high order people running around, and they can be disgusted with humanity. And if you find something that you're disgusted with, you'll do anything to destroy it. And if these people get into power, they have unlimited power under some kind of totalitarian governmental system, it's inevitable. Thank you all for coming.